Hello, Shona. Welcome to the show. It's really such a privilege to have you here today. For those of you who aren't too familiar with Shona, allow me to introduce her to you. Shona is a history enthusiast and also one of my favorite authors. She unearths the past to animate historical backdrops in her writings. Once a lecturer, now a writer. How the Victorians Live is her first book. Today, we are honored to welcome her as we step back to the Victorian era.
You are welcome.
Thank you so much. So, to kick off the conversation with a really fundamental question, why did you want to write about the Victorians?
Well, interestingly, to start off with, I didn't, and I was very reluctant at first because, yeah, I was
Really?
very reluctant at first because I just felt that I believed the stereotypical view of the Victorian era as being very stern, very strict,
Yeah.
very dark, suppressed, and obsessed with class, which they were, by the way. That stereotype
Yeah.
sticks. Um, and so yeah, originally I was a bit reluctant. So I started off with my website, with my blog. I started off looking at Shakespeare and the Elizabethan era. So if you have a look at my blog, you'll see all my early posts are on Elizabethan era. And I plan to kind of do some Elizabethan um, posts and then do some Victorian era posts. And I kind of started the Victorian era post a little reluctantly. It was like, oh, I have to do this kind of thing, which is just daft. It's your own blog. You can do what you like. Um, but um, but if I backtrack a bit, what happened was quite a few years ago now, probably about where are we now, 2025, so about 7 years ago, I was working as an administrator for a welding company with my best mate. It's fantastic. And I was bookkeeper as well. And but and it gave me time then to kind of, my children were getting older, and it gave me time to start pursuing new hobbies and things like that. And I've always been a history buff. And at the time, I was taking my children. We were going on family holidays to the English coast, to the south coast, to Dorset and Devon. And every time we went on holiday, there I had to have a visit to a castle, or at least two visits to, castle
Yeah.
museum, that kind of thing. And it was taking the girls to them and whatnot. And then I realised just how much I loved it and hadn't done it for a while, and since university really. And so so that was just fun, and that was just good fun. I was enjoying it. And then I started tutoring, personal tutoring as well. And and I was teaching a girl one day. I picked a Christmas Carol for her to look at. So we were studying for in England. You have something called the 11 plus exam, and it's an exam you take when you're in your in your second from last year at primary school. And then if you pass it, you can go to the local grammar school, which is that's a whole nother thing. But anyway, so I was tutoring her to pass this exam. And I realised on the exam that the students needed to answer a question on a piece of 19th century literature, and that they would just be given a random passage on the exam. So I thought, oh, I better get used to the language. So we started looking at A Christmas Carol by Dickens. And I realised very quickly that she had no knowledge, because why would she? Of the
Definitely.
Victorian era. So I got a book out of the library. I read the book. I didn't not agree with what the book said, but I just thought it didn't put it into context enough. So I ended up writing this kind of like long worksheet and spending a whole hour with her explaining why children worked in the Victorian era because she
Yeah.
was absolutely like, oh my God, it's children my age down mines and things. And it's like, yeah,
Flipping the chimney.
yeah,
Yeah.
cleaning.
Yeah.
So I had to, yeah, so I explained all that to her, and I suddenly realized I really, really enjoyed it. And at the time, I was going to take the tutoring further. That was the plan. Either set up on my own or carry on working for the company I was working for at the time. So I thought, oh, wouldn't it be good if I did a blog and then I could send my students to the blog to read the information? It's all there. So I started researching for the blog, and I started off with Victorian leisure and pleasure, which was great. So I started off reading and making notes about football and the pubs and all of that culture. And that was great. And then I changed jobs again. I changed jobs a lot. I changed jobs again, and I ended up working in a secondary school. So aged 11 to 18, basically, students aged 11 to 18, and supporting students with special needs in the classroom. So I had to go to all of the lessons and support students. So I had one main student with vision impairment. So I had to enlarge all the work and whatnot. And then, so I started sitting through English language lessons, English literature lessons, history lessons, and whatnot. And I just thought, actually, do you know what? This blog needs, I really need to get on and do this. This is really handy. And I can send all the students to my blog to get the context. And that was why I started off then with Shakespeare. So I started doing lots of Elizabethan posts. And then one day the teacher suddenly sprung on us, I think it was an extract from Oliver Twist. And then I suddenly thought, no, I need to do the Victorians. And yeah, so then I started doing some research into the Victorian era again, more of the lifestyle rather than the leisure and pleasure, which was only for the people who have money, so the middle classes and the upper classes. The working class didn't have much time for leisure until towards the 1870s. Um, and the more I started reading around the subject, the more I just suddenly thought, hold on, this is actually really, really interesting. And I just got stuck in, if you like. Thought, well, I need to do this properly, and yeah, and I loved it. And so what I've actually found, I think personally, is the Victorian era is really, really relevant to how we live today because, especially in England, because they literally kind of consolidated, if you like, um, everything that had come before, and they just tightened everything up, put in loads of legislation. So it's definitely the 19th century was the era of legislation. We'd never had it before. Um, and set almost like a pattern of how we have continued on living. So, and I just find that really, so that's my overall kind of view, if you like. And now I'm just digging into it in detail, if you like, to think, well, is that true? Or, where has that not happened and whatnot? Yeah. So that was why I went with the Victorian. So the Elizabethan and the Jacobean era are completely on hold. Not sure if I'm ever going to get around to doing that. So, we'll have to wait and see. Maybe when I'm about 70.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's so inspiring because you basically created a database for your students, your blogs. Yeah, basically like a
Yeah.
Victorian
Yeah.
database. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the plan. And actually, what I did have on there as well in the beginning on the website in the beginning was a page of all the films I recommend that
Uh,
people watch. And
Victorian themes.
the TV
Oh,
productions
TV
and
protections.
whatnot. Yeah,
Yeah.
and DVDs, the best DVDs to buy and whatnot. And then I had a crisis with the website, and my host told me that I had to delete a load of stuff to I'd got to like as big as like the website could be within the plan that I was paying for, if you like. And I needed to delete a load of stuff. So I deleted those pages, and now I'm thinking I need to put them back. So I'm hoping I've got those pages somewhere, and I will put them back on the website so that people can see my recommendations for films and versions and whatnot of 19th century literature. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, definitely. Probably you can put it on Instagram. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I could
Yeah.
do. I'm hoping I've still got the information somewhere because it was a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm hoping I didn't get rid of it altogether. But yeah.
Yeah. That's quite a lovely story. Yeah. So yeah, we've just talked about there's so much weird stuff in the Victorian era, like very strict morality, child labor, something like that.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's a Victorian fact that really surprises you, like utterly mind
Um,
blowing. Yeah,
yes. So I mean a lot of it so a lot of it
yeah,
surprised me. But I'm forever being surprised by what we used to get up to. Um, but the so, but all of the other stuff aside, what did surprise me is a really odd thing, but was the trade in secondhand clothes. So yeah, I had no idea that that towns and cities would be, and cities in particular, would be full of secondhand clothes shops that people sold their clothes onto the shops and people bought them from the shops. Yeah, but I was surprised at first. I was like, oh, this was quite a big thing. And then I just thought, actually, that's not surprising because when you think of the dresses and how elaborate they were and the undergarments everyone wore, well, the women, not the men, and all of uh and the petticoats and the hats and the gloves. And I think actually, no, I'm not surprised that there was this massive trade in secondhand clothing. And because the Victorians were very thrifty, so what we say, yeah, thrifty. So they didn't throw anything away if they could help it. Everything was recycled in a way. So so I really shouldn't have been surprised about the second-hand clothes. But yeah, I was. But it's interesting because so you had shops of second-hand clothes that people had sold on, and also things like curtains, furnishings, and things like that. So, for instance, in A Christmas Carol, Scrooge, when he sees his death, I can't remember who the characters are, but they're busy taking down the curtains of his bed. So he's got
yeah,
a four-poster bed with curtains all the way round, and that was, although it's seen as a sign of wealth, having a four-poster bed with curtains round. It was also a practical thing, kept you warm at night, basically. So anyway, and they're busy taking down the curtains, and she's the servant or whoever it is going to sell them. And someone's saying, "Oh, well, that's not really, they belong to him. It should be in his will who they go to or whatever." She's just like, "He's not here. He's dead. I didn't like him. I don't care." And she names the price that she thinks she can get for them, and that's what they do. They're literally going through his room and stripping his room of everything that they think they can sell. um, and I found that quite I found it not shocking, but I thought, but was there a market for it? And then, of course, the answer is yes, there was. There was a very big market for it. Um, so yeah, so basically, mainly working class people bought their clothes secondhand. They couldn't buy anything new because in order to buy clothes new, they would have to go to a tailor's or a modiste, as it was for the women, and have their clothes, have themselves measured up and have their clothes made for them. And of course, that cost so much money, that was way out of their price range. So they would buy literally all their clothing secondhand, and the women would obviously, as a woman, you learned to sew, whether you liked it or not, you learned to sew, and as a child, and women would make clothes. They would make men's shirts. They would make their dresses and whatnot. But also, it was very, you could only do that if you had the space in your home to lay out the material on the table and have the scissors to cut it. And you could afford all of that. And your husband hadn't pawned your dressmaking scissors because you've run out of money and he wants to go to the pub, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, so there was this big trade in secondhand clothes,
Yeah.
but the women especially couldn't buy anything that was too elaborate or too fancy because then it was above, they were wearing clothes that were above their station.
Yeah.
So their station in life, yeah. So they would need to either buy them and then take a few ruffles off and make them look
Yeah.
less
Yeah. Yeah.
elaborate and then use that material for to make something else. Um, or they would just have to buy secondhand clothes that were a little plainer, you know. So yeah, so there was and that really surprised me as well because I thought, well, surely if you got hold of stuff secondhand, it didn't matter what you wore, you know. And it turned out that it did. It was actually really important what that a working class woman or working class man wore the clothes that was correct for the working class. So, because the middle classes and the upper classes said so. And if you were a woman and you'd bought, say, secondhand, a very fancy dress, um, then people would think, where did you get that from? You stole it,
Yeah. Yeah.
or you're a prostitute or a mistress of a wealthy man who has bought that for you. Either way, you're immoral
Yeah.
and not a good person to be around, etc., etc., you know. So, and I just found that really, really interesting. And the same was for jewelry as well. So, a woman couldn't be given an expensive piece of jewelry by someone, a working class woman. When I say this is always working class. A working class woman couldn't be given an expensive piece of jewelry by someone because it would be presumed that it had been given as a gift in exchange for favors, sexual favors, or she's stolen it. So yeah, so in literature, you do have the female characters who usually have one piece of jewelry or something that they've inherited from their mother.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
would be okay. You would get away with the one thing, like the one or two nice brooches, and you can say I inherited them from my mother, and you know, but that was about it. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
see.
so I
Yeah.
found that very, very surprising. Oh, and the other thing is apparently it was quite common, especially in London, for men to pawn their Sunday best suit on a Monday,
Oh,
and then that
really?
would go into the pawn shop, and they'd get their money, and then that gets spent on food and whatnot for the rest of the week. And then when payday came around on a Friday, they would go back to the pawn shop, hand over the money, get the suit back out, ready for church on Sunday. And then
Oh,
Monday morning
wow.
it would go back into the pawn shop
That's
again.
very efficient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people did have working class people did have nice clothes, but they usually only had one outfit that was known as your Sunday best, and you wore that to church on a Sunday. And so at church, the wealthier members of the congregation would expect to see you in the same Sunday best every Sunday. So the woman will wear the same dress every Sunday. If a woman turned up to church a working class woman turned up to church every Sunday, a different dress each time, questions that, again, people would
Yeah,
start
yeah.
to gossip. So
Yeah.
yeah, they
Of
start to gossip and
course,
go,
each
oh,
year,
oh, oh." Yeah,
yeah.
where did she get that from? How did she manage that? Because everyone knew each other's business as well. And that was the other thing that actually did surprise me was in an era where you didn't have the telephone, you didn't have you didn't even have the telegraph until halfway through. Um, Everyone knew, pretty much knew everyone's business. Everyone took an interest. You couldn't really be anonymous. So that's the impression I get. Someone somewhere might correct me. By the way, someone somewhere might correct me on everything, but this is the impression I get, because people didn't move away and move around so much. So, and people did take an interest in their neighbourhood. Doesn't matter how dire the neighbourhood was, people were aware of what was going on. So, yeah, so it led to a lot of gossip. And okay, people might have kept themselves to themselves, but they still took in all the information and, yes, were very observant. So, yeah.
It's really surprising for me because people at that time were really kind of stuck with their station. They don't really try to kind of climb the social ladder. They felt like it's kind of immoral in some way. So yeah, that's
Mm,
really really
mm.
surprising. Yeah,
The Victorians were incredibly class driven, like really class driven, and it's a very particularly English thing, I think. It's hard to tell when you live in this country. Um, we are, and we are still dealing with the after effects of it
yeah,
now. Um, so basically, the Victorians, you had your pre-Victorian period, so through the Georgian era and before that, you had your aristocracy. So you had the royalty, you had all the nobility around the royalty, but you also had, and then you just had everyone else. Everyone else were just the workers, if you like. And the launch of the middle class, what we call in this country the middle class, came about when people with the industrial revolution and the scientific revolution before that at the end of the 18th century basically started to earn more money, um, and could afford to buy land, and because they could afford to buy land, it gave them the vote. It gave the man of the family the vote. And because he had the vote, he was able to have a say of how his money was spent and things like that. And so you got the middle class formed. And the middle class is basically, especially so in the Victorian era, um, people who earned at least £50 a year. And I, the best thing to do is go onto the Bank of England calculator, and the Bank of England calculator will let you know what that is in today's money in any country. So it's great. But you had to earn between at least £50 a year, and even better if it was nearer the £200 mark or beyond. Okay. And that made you middle class. And it was the middle classes who then started up with kind of all these rules, if you like, of what you could and can't do, and or couldn't do, and what they could do, and what the working class could do, and all of that stuff. And they basically fueled the Victorian era, the growth, if you like. Yeah. So and just everything. They came up with the ideas for everything. And I think it makes really, really interesting studying because everyone wants to do better in life. Not well, normally, you kind of always want your children to have more than what you had and things like that. And that's what the middle classes did. They basically just went, I might have been born working class, but I want my child to get an education. I want my child to marry well. I want, I want my daughter in particular to marry a husband with money so she doesn't have to worry, and things like that. And the middle classes fueled that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like Pride and Prejudice, right?
Mm,
Just want to marry,
absolutely.
yeah, marry a witch husband. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. But I really like I mean I love Pride and Prejudice. Absolutely brilliant. But it does beg the question,
yeah,
what was Mr. Bennet thinking of not providing? He had five daughters. He should have
yeah,
known. He
yeah,
should have been putting some money by for them, rather than this, you've got to marry a rich husband. Which of course it wouldn't be a good story if you didn't have you've got to marry a rich husband. But even so, seriously, it's just slightly irritating.
yeah,
You know,
definitely.
I think the backstory would be interesting as to what did Mr. Bennet do with his money,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
whatnot. So that yeah, his five daughters haven't married. But I think actually what it does highlight was the issue with inheritance.
yeah, definitely.
So a girl couldn't inherit property because as a woman you only existed, you were your father's property and then you were your husband's property, and everything that you had belonged to your father, and when you got married everything you had transferred to your husband, and so therefore it was very difficult to actually leave property to women. It could be done legally, it could be done, but if the property had a old entail on it from going years and years and years back, that couldn't be broken. It is very, very difficult to get the entails on property broken, if you like, so that you could pass it on to who you wanted to pass it on to, rather than the nearest firstborn male. So yeah, so that's what Jane Austen is definitely highlighting there, and her frustration at it. So, but yeah, but I love the characters of Pride and Prejudice. So yeah.
Yeah, it's always kind of interesting to both look into context and also the text as well. Yeah,
Mm, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
definitely. And we've just talked about the aristocracy. So,
Mm,
we all know that Victorian women's fashion was kind of fancy and elaborate in some way. They had
mm,
horses, bustles, uh, bodices, layers, lace, and different types
yeah,
of dresses. So I'm just wondering, in your research, did you uncover how they manage practical things like using the bathroom or something
yeah,
really daily? Yeah,
yeah. Um, Actually, it's really interesting because not much, to be honest. And I think that's because there's not an awful lot written down. Um, I think probably because negotiating day it was just such a it was just something you just got on with, if you like.
yeah,
I have a feeling that if someone went through the archives, and I'm sure a historian somewhere has, um, gone through ladies' magazines like the self-help, like the self-help books and the magazines on how to negotiate. Also, things like getting in and out of a carriage in a dress that's either the slim fitting ones at the end of the century, the slim fitting dresses with the bustle, or the massive crinolines in the 40s and 50s. Um, I'm sure that someone somewhere has written how women negotiated with that. It's not something I came across, just because I only did the one chapter on fashion in my
yeah,
book. And to get down to that kind of level of detail, I would need to, like I say, go through
yeah,
Victorian fashion mag self-help books
definitely,
and stuff like that, of
definitely.
which there are thousands,
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
thousands. However, one thing I will say is that having made costumes, theatre costumes when I was younger, those kind of costumes, dresses, they are surprisingly easy to wear and move around in, because the petticoats hold everything away from you, and they're collapsible as well. So you have the hoops, the metal hoops, but they will collapse like a concertina.
Oh,
So you can actually, wear something like that, gather it all up, pull the
oh,
petticoat up,
oh,
and it's absolutely fine. And of course, they had no underwear underneath to fiddle around with. So you didn't really, I mean, middle class women probably started wearing underwear. Queen Victoria wore under shorts or whatever you call them, undergarments, they were just known as. They weren't called knickers. And they were kind of like a modern day cotton boxer short, a pair of boxer shorts, if you like, tied at the waist with ribbons. Um, but they weren't joined in the middle to make ease of going to the toilet. So not quite sure what the point was of wearing them. And I think a lot of women actually probably chose not to wear them because it was another thing round the waist, which when you then got a couple of petticoats and an overskirt on tied around your waist as well, it can get a bit uncomfortable.
yeah,
So all you had to do was literally gather up your things and
yeah,
collapse them
yeah,
and plonk your bottom down, and you're absolutely fine.
yeah, that's,
Um,
yeah,
the other thing to remember is that the women who wore the really elaborate costumes um, were middle class or upper class,
yeah,
and they didn't travel anywhere without a chaperone. So they wouldn't have gone anywhere without another lady with them, either a maid or a paid companion. And women helped each other with things. Obviously, so if a woman was going into a privy somewhere, as the old toilets were called, into a privy, um, first of all, she would know how to negotiate her dress and whatnot. But B, she would have a maid with her to help her if she needed it, just to get her settled on the privy. And then the maid would go out the room and she'd do business in peace. And then the maid would come back and just straighten out her dress and make sure it's all, and nothing
clean,
tucked
yeah,
up anywhere and the hoop isn't up at the back and things like that. And yeah, so a woman would have someone to do that for her. The other thing is if a lady went to a ball, or so if we say a ball to start off with, say she went to a ball at someone's house, the restrooms there, or retiring rooms as they were called, would have maids in there provided by the host, would have maids in there to help. So they would help you negotiate sorting out your clothes so that you could go to toilet, then leave you to it, and then again you come back out and they would sort you all out and prepare you do your hair again and all of that stuff. And then the other thing is that from what I can work out, women didn't go out for any particular length of time because there were no public toilets. So
yeah,
there were so men had coffee houses, they
yeah,
had their clubs, they had the pubs, or that was more of a working class thing. Middle class men had their these chop houses where they could go and get a cheap meal and things like that, and those would all have somewhere if a privy or some kind of place to go to the toilet, whereas women didn't really have that. Um, and it's something, so I'm finishing book number 2 at the moment, and then book number 3 is actually going to be on leisure and pleasure, basically the Victorian era and all the fun stuff that they did and came up with. And so I've already started doing a little bit of research, and from what I can work out, it's only when tea rooms started to open up and they provided these tea rooms, and this was towards the end of the century. Tea rooms opened up and would provide privy for the women, and the department store as well, towards the end of the century, also provided restrooms for women. Only then did women start going shopping for longer time, a longer period of time, if that makes
yeah.
sense. So a woman would have to literally plan her visits around
Uh,
how long she could hold on to her wee, basically. Yeah.
that's a,
And
yeah,
which I think is just bizarre, but anyway. Um, so and the only thing I can think of is that people didn't drink as much liquid as we do nowadays. They must have had bladders of steel and just probably didn't drink too much, because they would get caught short, as they say, and would have nowhere to go. You see, the thing is again, it's that if you went to an inn, um, you would have to be with someone, but even two women going to the local inn because they needed the toilet would be frowned upon. You would be there for a reason, and that is to see if you could pick up a punter, and earn some money. So yeah, it was women's lives were quite restrictive, and I know people have written about how Victorian fashion was used to keep women in their place, if you like.
Really?
So, but yeah, but I couldn't say any essays off the top of my head, but it's certainly a subject that has been explored, of how Victorian women's fashion in particular was a big kind of thing to keep them restricted in their movements. Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's just wow, really, really mind blowing. It's
Yeah.
utterly mind
Oh,
blowing now. Yeah,
the other thing I was going to say as well is so I've got this in my notes. If a woman was pregnant or had her
yeah.
period, she was encouraged to stay at home and not go anywhere. So for kind of 7 days, again, this is middle class. Working class women had no choice. Working class women had to get on with it. They had to go to work. They had kids to raise. They had a husband to feed, and they had to do it all themselves because they couldn't afford servants. But middle class women and upper class women, if they were just encouraged to stay in, not do anything, lest it ruin their health, basically, and made them hysterical as well. So yeah, was so back to the clothing. So for working class women, the clothing was a little bit less elaborate. Although I do know that with the crinoline, those really big skirts, that phase, the servants were trying to wear them and everything. And there are a few. I don't know if you're familiar with Punch magazine,
Not really.
from the Victorian era. So Punch magazine is absolutely, and the Punch cartoons they just used to send up everything. And there's pictures of there's cartoons of maids trying to clean while wearing these massive skirts and knocking everything all the ornaments
Yeah,
flying and whatnot. So they're worth looking up if you can Google those.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and so yeah, but working class women again, their dress was a little. They tried to follow the fashion, but it was a little more restrained, if you like, because they had to work in it, move in it. They couldn't turn up to a factory and
Yeah,
work the machines in a factory in a
yeah,
really
definitely,
fancy bustle dress. It
definitely,
you know,
definitely.
so
Yeah,
so working class women had less fancy dress, and as a result, they could move around fine and do what they needed to do without a maid. And those who were in the really elaborate costumes and whatnot always had someone to help them negotiate everything.
yeah, that's a really
Yeah,
detailed explanation. Thank you so
that's
much,
okay.
Shona. Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. We've just talked about the basically the Victorian life back then.
Hmm.
So, Shona, did you kind of discover a common myth about Victorian life that you actually debunked? It can be
Well,
about the aristocracy or just simply the normal people.
yeah, I wouldn't say it's anything that I personally have said. I found this evidence, and this is not true, if you like, because I'm not a historian with a PhD and whatnot, and you know, but what I have found is that through my research, which other brilliant historians with these PhDs and stuff have done, what I have found is that we have this kind of idea that people in back in the day, whenever, people in this country cooked from scratch all the time. Everything was homemade and whatnot.
Yeah, yeah,
And I was really surprised to find that for the working class people who lived in towns and cities, and in the cities in particular, um, couldn't cook from scratch because they are working such long days. They needed the equivalent of a modern day ready meal when they got in. So, um, and with British cooking methods, which traditionally involves cooking stuff long and slow until it's mushy, basically.
yeah,
Um, uh, Working class people just could not do that because um, if they'd been out all day and getting into their home, you had to start a fire to cook on
yeah,
to start with.
yeah,
So that takes time to get that going. And you certainly then don't have time for a beef stew to cook for 3 hours before, like you're going to bed then. So basically, working class people who lived in cities in particular, and again particularly in London, relied on street food. So pre-cooked food that people were cooking on the streets, and you pick it up on your way home, take it home, and eat it. So things like I've got my list here, that's why I keep looking down. So things like cooked pies, fried fish, jacket potatoes, um, and we ate a lot of bread as well, which is, I thought, surely we didn't eat that much bread. We did. And we didn't eat potatoes as much. Well, not in the south of England. I think in northern parts of England, we ate kind of pottage, so oats and whatnot, a bit more. Ireland obviously was the place where the potatoes were grown, which led to the terrible, terrible potato famine. But yeah, we basically just relied on bread and street food, working class people, which I found really interesting. All of this, people used to cook from scratch all the time. Probably not so much in the Victorian era. Again, if you're middle class, upper class, you've got to cook, then
yeah,
you probably would, you know.
yeah, definitely.
Um, or you would, but even so, I think sometimes if they found, someone would come round and sell door to door, they sell food door to door as well. And if you got to know the person and know that you would buy it from them, it just, any kind of labor saving device is welcome. And when you've got the money, why not? So yeah, all of this cooked from scratch all the time. Not really. No, you had to be able to afford the fuel and the cooking implements and have the space to store it all as well.
Yeah,
And if you didn't, you couldn't, and you ate cold food or you bought hot food off the street. So
yeah,
yeah.
interesting.
Mm,
Yeah, their takeaway in the Victorian times. Yeah,
yeah. But if there's anything else you can think of that people say and you want me to kind of think about whether it's true or not, go ahead and say if there's anything, is it really
we're not
true
gonna go a bit further on that. Yeah.
that
Okay, then yeah, we've just talked about food, fashion. So I'm just wondering, Shona, as a historian and author, if you could pick one Victorian daily ritual or habit that you wish was still did today, what would it be?
well, it's really interesting because a lot of our daily rituals, especially in this country, are based
Yeah,
upon um, what was put in place in the Victorian era and before that as well. Um, but one thing I do find interesting, my mother's going to love me when I say this, is the all over strip wash, basically. So the Victorians, this is the other thing as well. It's a myth that anyone prior 20th who lived prior to the 20th century were dirty and smelled, because it's just
Yeah.
not true. Because we didn't have indoor plumbing in this country for a very, very long time, people didn't have baths as often, because first of all, you had to be able to afford to buy a big tin bath. Then you had to be able to afford the fuel on the fire to heat the water to fill the bath, and then you had to fill the bath. It's a lot of work, and again, middle class, upper class people obviously could do that. They had a whole team of servants who could be up and down the stairs with
Yeah.
hot, pails of hot
Yeah.
water and
Definitely.
whatnot.
Yeah.
But certainly not for the working class. And so what people used to do was what you call the stripped down wash, except it was so cold especially in autumn and winter and early spring in this country, absolutely freezing, first thing in the morning, and people were up early. Um, they would wash but still keep their clothes on. so
Yeah.
so still keep their night
Yeah.
clothes on. And so you get a bowl of warm water or hot water or cold if you couldn't afford the fuel, and you'd have your soap if you could afford it, um, and you'd have your cloth, and you would literally just start from. So some people say you'd start from the feet up. Personally, I would start with my face, and people would just literally just wash all over, and then as they washed and dried, they'd then dress that item of clothing to keep warm because it was cold.
Yeah.
And so yes, they'd end up washing every day, just one bowl of warm water, but they'd end up washing all over every day, but at the start of the day, before getting dressed. And even really, really, oh, thank you. Thank you. So, cup of tea.
Yeah. Cup of tea.
I
Yeah.
know,
Very
very
English. Yeah.
British. um, and I think it's something that probably in our eco-conscious times, you use less water than if you jump in the shower. So I just wonder if it's something we should all go back to doing if we want to kind of save water, save energy, and whatnot, because you'd be just as clean. And the reason why I say my mother would love this is my mum was brought up in a Victorian house. So when she was born and up until the age of 11, she lived in a Victorian terraced house, and there were a lot of them, and they're all crammed in together. And um, and I'm pretty certain that they had the privy was in the outhouse in the garden, which was the case of a lot of Victorian working class houses. And so that's what they had to do. You would have your bowl of water, and you would wash indoors, and and yeah, and you'd wash your hair once a week. And my mum still only washes her hair once a week because um, Victorian women in particular, although they had very, very, very long hair, never cut their hair. Um, they would brush it, like really, even the poorest woman would have some form of hairbrush to brush her hair, and it was brushed so often it just clears all the debris out, anything out. But also women wore hats outside or some kind of head covering, so that protected their hair, so their hair didn't need washing as much as we probably do nowadays. So yeah, I think that the daily ritual of the morning wash, which we've replaced with a morning shower, but I do wonder if in the future we'll be encouraged to go back to morning washes because it uses less water and less energy.
Yeah. That's interesting. I haven't heard of that before. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's not even referred in some of the Victorian novels, like Dickens novels. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah. That's really like,
no.
yeah, a
Yeah.
hidden gem, actually. Yeah.
It always makes me wince though if I read or see in a program that there's some guy with the water pump and the cold water and having a wash under it in the morning.
Yeah,
I couldn't do that. I would rather be dirty and smelly.
yeah, definitely, definitely. In your book, Shona, you have often referred to different novels like Oliver
Hmm.
Twist. And Oliver Twist as a novel is filled with scenes of markets, factories, child
Hmm.
labor, industry, and family as well. How does understanding real Victorian daily life make those books more vivid?
For me, I think I used to, if I read something like Oliver Twist, this is how I started off. If I read something like Oliver Twist, I would think, did that really happen? Is that true? Really? And then the answer is obviously I started digging when actually, yes, it was. So Dickens was prone to exaggeration. We all know that because he had a point to make and it was he did the right thing, absolutely. Um, so, but I just think that it just rather I think it helps you get into the story knowing that what he's writing or what anyone else is writing is true. I think it for me, I would find it really hard to believe that um, a cotton factory was at the air was filled with fragments of cotton, you know, until until I actually then went, oh no, yeah, no, that is true. That is true. And that was how people got cotton lung and problems with their breathing and stuff like it really, really was true. And so I think that's how it helps. But for me, I think in my book in particular, I try to answer the whys. So rather than saying this happened, and this happened, why? Why was it that? So I've got some examples here actually. So why were there so many poor people, so many people living in poverty?
Yeah,
Okay. Why couldn't women work, or why were their jobs so rubbish, basically, and why did they earn so little? Why didn't labourers and other working class men have the vote? Why were people not educated? Why did the Victorians build lots of terraced houses rather than, which is quite unique to this country, rather than the tenement buildings that were
yeah,
popular in Scotland and the rest of Europe? Um, why were people squashed into large Georgian houses? That was the thing. That was one of the things that I started off with. So if a character in a book is going home and they go into this kind of like room, if you like, why do they only have a room? Why can they not afford a whole floor
yeah,
or
yeah,
and whatnot? And I think that's what I've tried to answer in the book. So when I'm reading a novel, I'm always thinking, well, why is the character making those decisions, if you like, doing the things that they're doing? And in particular of 19th century literature, it's like, why doesn't Bob Cratchit just tell Scrooge where to stick his job, basically? Why? Because because when he gets home, he's got a family of people who rely on him. Like, okay, well, so does everyone. Why does he still not tell him to stick his job? He can get one elsewhere. No, he can't. Because if he tells Scrooge, um, I'm not working for you anymore. Scrooge will make sure that he doesn't work for anyone as a clerk. Scrooge will make sure in revenge, because he's that type of character, that Bob Cratchit doesn't get a job as a clerk, which is actually a fairly well paid job. So Bob Cratchit in A Christmas Carol is underpaid by Scrooge, but he's stuck because his wife can't work because A, women weren't encouraged to work. B, if she did work, whatever work she takes on is not going to pay very much. Um, so Mrs. Cratchit has to look after the children so that the children can work and pay into the household. And she's got Tiny Tim to look after, who, because he can't work and he can't do anything because he's poorly. So that is why Bob Cratchit can't tell Scrooge to get lost, basically. There's no welfare system. So he's not going to get any money from the state. There's no job seekers allowance, no job um, uh, child benefit, which is what we have in this country now, nothing. So, and I think that's what I try to answer. So, yeah, and why did people get sick so easily?
Yeah.
So, because of living conditions, money, blah, 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 food and all of that. So, why weren't there any drains? Like, what's that all about? And why was Oliver Twist treated so terribly in the workhouse? It's just why? Why? I mean, in the opening scenes when his mum has just had him, they literally deliver him and then just plonk him on the side of the bed and just wait to see if he's going to take a breath or not,
Yeah.
because they really, really don't care because he's a workhouse child. He's the mother, the fact that she's in the workhouse, she's unmarried, she's immoral. Therefore, the child is going to naturally be that way because he will have naturally inherited all of that from his mother. So they don't really want to, so they just kind of put him there and, leave him to die. But as it is, Oliver Twist refuses to die. So, and he refuses to die all the way through the book.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so I've tried to answer the why questions of, yeah, and
Yeah.
I hope I've done it.
Yeah, you did a really good job actually. Yeah. I mean, me as a kind of a reader, after
Mm,
reading your book, I actually got so much information that I couldn't simply get from just reading a Victorian novel like Oliver Twist, for example. You know, yeah, especially the part when you talked about the room. Why not the whole building? Why not the whole house? Yeah,
mm. Yeah,
that
yeah,
was
this is
yeah,
it. And when he goes to the Undertaker's and I can't remember, he sleeps in the cellar or something or
yeah,
other.
yeah,
And
yeah,
again, this is Dickens exaggerating,
yeah.
but well, not exaggerating actually, because that really did happen. It is the truth.
Part of the
But
history.
it's his sense of humour that Dickens puts into it. He's very dry, very almost sarcastic with it, because it's a whole, this is how we treat someone, this is how
Yeah,
we treat a young boy, this is the system, and this is how we treat it because we've decided that this is the best way. He hated the poor law, absolutely hated it, as did a lot of well-known writers and philanthropists and whatnot of the era. And I go into that in the book I'm doing now. Actually, I've
yeah,
got a massive section on workhouse reform, charity and philanthropy, how we looked after the elderly, um, and orphans and uh, people who were mentally ill and all of that stuff. Yeah, it's like I've got about 4 chapters that cover all of that. And yeah, so Dickens really does drive the point home there, I think, in Oliver Twist. So good, I'm glad that it really helped because that is the whole idea. So yeah.
that really helps. Yeah, thank you so much, and I really look forward to your book as well.
Yeah, I'm on the countdown now. I've got 3 months.
Yeah.
I've got 3 months to finish it. It's like, oh.
Did you set the deadline yourself, or it's sort of set
No,
by the publisher?
so the pub, I do set my own deadline. They say, oh, when do you think you can have it in by? And I go, oh, randomly pick a
Yeah.
date. That one I do.
Yeah.
And then they're very good if I don't get it quite
Yeah.
finished and say, can I have another month? But to be honest, I'd rather not. I just want it in because I want to work on the next one. I want to work on my
Yeah.
website a bit more, do a few more blog posts and things. That's the plan. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we've just talked about Oliver Twist and also other Victorian novels. They are actually also commonly read in Hong Kong. And
Mm.
among my audience, there are many young readers and also Hong Kong students as well. So if they really want to expose themselves to Victorian literature or English literature in general, would you
Mm.
mind sharing a piece of advice with them?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
So what I recommend, and this really works for me, is get a DVD or a film of the book. Okay. So a lot of people, when I was doing performing arts, we always got told, don't read the play first or read the book first, then watch any adaptations afterwards. Okay. But actually, some of my fellow students just threw that out the window and said, no, 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 no. In order to help break down the text, if you like, they helped to see how other people had done it first, and they found it didn't influence their interpretations of a character or whatever. And so, that is something I've done ever since. So I would definitely recommend. So you've got a book. So let's say, let's pick something else we haven't spoken about. So let's go for Jekyll and Hyde, for
yeah,
instance. Okay. So Jekyll and Hyde, you could start reading the book by all means. I mean, go ahead, never say don't start reading the book, but find a really good adaptation, a film version or a DVD of a TV movie or something like that. Amazon, not that I want to promote Amazon, by the way, but you can always go on Amazon to see what's available and then see if you can buy it from other retailers. That's what I usually do. Um, and then I've actually sat there with the book and watched seen how they compare, if you like, and it helps to sometimes follow it, especially if the book is particularly big one or a little bit complicated, got a convoluted plot. So I did this with The Importance of Being Earnest, Oscar Wilde. Um, I had to study the play, and so I read the play, and then I got there's a really good film version with Colin Firth in it, who plays Mr. Darcy in the Pride and Prejudice, the BBC version of Pride and Prejudice, and obviously he's Mr. Darcy. Is he? Yeah, he's Mr. Darcy, isn't he? In Bridget Jones and whatnot. Anyway, so he's in a brilliant film version of The Importance of Being Earnest. So I bought that, and I kind of skimmed through the play, and went, oh right, okay, yeah. I'd studied a little bit of it years ago, so I had an idea of the plot, and then I literally just watched the film, went, yep, loved it, absolutely brilliant, love Oscar Wilde, and then I went back through and read the play and watched the film and kind of stopped and started it, and just like it just really, really helped to consolidate it and the plot points and whatnot. And if you've got a synopsis as well, that's even better. If you've got something that tells you the main points that happen in each scene and why and whatnot, that helps as well. Because I think it can be quite overwhelming sometimes to start
yeah,
off
definitely. Yeah,
reading a book, especially a 19th century literature
yeah, the
book.
language is way
I
more flowery.
yeah, it hurt seriously, it can hurt your brain. So um and I think that so some people go, oh, that's cheating, right? No, it's not. Because um with a performing arts background, I love a play. I love a I love watching, stories brought to life that way. So I love TV, I love film, and I love the theatre. And I think that there's nothing better than watching an adaptation and seeing how someone's done it, and read the reviews as well and see what the reviewers say of it, of whether they think it follows the book or not follow the book or whatever. So for instance, with Jekyll and Hyde, I don't know why I picked that one, but so the book is a good place to start with any if anyone wants to start with 19th century literature as well, because it's fairly short. But the BBC did a brilliant adaptation. I think it was just called Hyde. Um, about 15 years ago now. And I can't think of the name of the actor now, the lead actor in it off the top of my head. But anyway, he's well known. And so they've done a modern version, if you like, but it still kind of follows the same ideas, if
Yeah.
and so it's worth, and there's always going to be some version around that you could watch. So, and then the other thing is, if you can go to like and I don't know if anyone who's visiting the UK, I would say, because I don't know what's available, obviously in Hong Kong. Um, but if you can go to like a living history museum, so if you ever are lucky enough to um, come to London, or definitely go to a museum where it's what they call immersive, if you like, So yeah, have an immersive experience. Take the opportunity if you get, if you go to the Victorian schoolroom, like I've been to two, and if you get the opportunity, dress up. And get, help try and get into character and wear
Immerse
some
yourself.
costumes. Yeah, see what that's like. And if they're cooking, try the food. I mean, I went to the old operating theatre in London, and I went for their talk on Victorian surgery on a Saturday morning, and they needed a volunteer to lay down on the bench, and
Yeah.
well, they showed how they would do an amputation, and I just went, yeah, that's okay, I'll do it.
Because sounds
So I
fun.
laid
Yeah.
down on the operating bench at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning, with everybody else watching, while they explained how they would take my lower leg off, and it just helps. Yeah, I find it just helps. So yeah, definitely immerse yourself in it by watching the TV versions, watching film versions, see a play if you can, if something's available and you can get to it and you can afford it, that's great. And if you go to a museum, take any opportunity, even if it's just crushing herbs or eating a scone that they've baked or something or other, just yeah, give
Yeah.
give that a
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
you know, your recommendation really makes learning so much more interesting and fun, actually. Trying
Good.
Victorian foods, trying their
Yeah.
costumes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and you could even one thing I keep meaning to do, and I haven't managed to do it yet, but one thing I do keep meaning to do is try a few more Victorian recipes. So there are loads and loads of recipe books out there, and I keep meaning to. There's a few things, a few of our cake recipes and stuff have come from that era and whatnot. So obviously the Victoria sponge cake, I make that all the time. Um, but yeah, it could even get a recipe book and just give it a go. And I do keep meaning to do that. I really want to try making an old gruel. So it is on my list of things to do. Actually, go, what did that actually
Yeah.
taste like? In all seriousness, what did it taste like? Probably vile, but I need to kind of do that. So um, the other thing I'm doing at the moment is I'm redoing my garden, which I am going to be putting on Instagram later on when I've actually done something. But the plan is to grow. I'm researching kind of the plants that you would find in a Victorian cottage garden, and then I'm going to have a go at growing them. And so yeah, so I said to my mum, I want to try growing the old varieties of roses. So the type of rose that you would grow in the Victorian era, she pulled a face. So you'll be lucky, because obviously we've bred them since to be more disease resistant and things like that. But I just think I've just got to try these things and see what happens. So yeah, I'd encourage anyone else to do the same, definitely.
you. So the final questions. So actually, Shona, you have somehow answered this question already.
Mm,
We talk about Jekyll and Hyde. So
mm.
yeah, but just want to know more about your thoughts. So what's the short and engaging entry point for someone, especially non-native speakers, non-English native speakers, um, that you should recommend to start from if they really want to expose themselves to Victorian literature?
Mm. So I would always go for the shorter stories first. So you could either just try anyone's short stories. I would personally, I would pick a ghost story.
Ghost story. Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, ghost stories are just I love ghost story. And some of the short ghost stories written by Dickens, um, Edgar Allan Poe,
Yeah,
who's an American writer,
yeah.
yeah, his short stories. I would go for a short story, nice short ghost story to start off with, and build your way up to a book. In terms of books, I think that A Christmas Carol, and that's a ghost story, so that's a good one to start with. Some of the Sherlock Holmes, there's
Yeah, sure.
loads and loads of
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes short stories to start off with, or those books. I particularly like The War of the Worlds. I think that's a good I like it because it's an end of the Victorian era book. So it's good to read, especially if you've read an early Victorian era book like A Christmas Carol, and then something like The War of the Worlds is great. It shows how far along everything, science and whatnot had moved along in the century. Um, but it's a difficult one. I think that Jane Eyre is always a good one to start with. Um, and I absolutely love Wuthering Heights, but I think it's a bit long. It needs a
Yeah.
nice chunk
Yeah.
taking out
Yeah.
of it, definitely. And the same with Frankenstein. Love Frankenstein, but again, it needs a massive edit.
Yeah.
Um, People everywhere now going, no,
Yeah.
no. But that's just me. So I think that it's not something I've read yet, but I think reading fan fiction as well around it is not a bad thing. If people have rewritten the story, but in a more modern language, if it helps you get a gist of the story and the characters and blah blah blah, blah, that's no bad thing. I mean, I think any reading is good, so I'm not snobby when it comes to books. So, and then the other thing I would say that I absolutely recommend to everyone to read, if you haven't read it already, is The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. So she's a modern writer, she's still going, Susan Hill, brilliant writer. I've read pretty much all her books, she's written all sorts of stuff, but she writes a really good ghost story. And The Woman in Black is set in the Victorian era. So it gives you a really, really good idea of the time, if you like, whatnot, and how people behave and all of that stuff. But it's just a really, really good ghost story. And then you can also get it on DVD as a film. There is a version with Daniel Radcliffe in it from 2012, which is really good to watch when you. I would read the book first, then watch the film. In this case, I have to admit. But there is another TV version from 1989. It was a TV movie. I haven't got written down who the main character, the actor is in it, I'm afraid. But if you look up 1989 version of The Woman in Black, it's really scary, really scary. So, well, I think it is anyway. Um, yeah, so I would definitely read those. Read The Woman in Black as well. So, and I was very, very fortunate years ago. It ran as a play in the West End in London for a very long time, The Woman in Black. and I took my students to see it when I was a performing arts lecturer years ago, and absolutely scared the life out of me then. So it's just I've read the book, I've watched two versions of the film, and I've seen the play, and I'm still not bored of the story. So yeah, yeah, really good. So and then the other thing is uh, I said about the importance of being earnest. And then the other thing on my list, personally, for me to watch is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. So the book is massive. So I'm going to start off with the BBC's version from
Yeah.
2004 with Richard Armitage in it. So I watched the film
Yeah.
of The
Yeah.
Picture of Dorian Gray, and so now it's made me want to read the book. So
Yeah.
I'm doing it the
Yeah.
other way around. I've
Yeah.
watched the film and then I think, oh, now I kind of know the story and what to expect. I'm going to read the book and see. And then my other tip is dare I say this, it is okay to skip parts as well. You know,
Yeah.
you're reading the book and it gets a bit, skip it by all means. Okay. If you've
Yeah.
got the synopsis as well, you're going to know the main plot points, because I find it really difficult sometimes if I'm tired or whatever, just trying to read it. It must be, really tiring sometimes if you're, a EAL student. So it's just yeah, so skip bits by all means. So especially Thomas Hardy's
Yeah.
descriptions of the
Tom Sutton.
countryside.
Yeah. Just can't
I mean, I like
remember
the
that.
stuff. He's got
Yeah.
good ideas, but do you know what? These endless pages of fields and trees and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's perfectly okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Thomas Hardy is really into trees, actually. I feel like, yeah.
Yeah.
Should have written books about trees as well. Yeah.
I love a tree. I actually love trees. I am a big
Ah, yeah.
tree fan,
You
but I
have a
have two
garden.
as well in my
Yeah.
garden. I'm very
Yeah. You
lucky.
have a garden.
But even so, sometimes
Yeah.
he just yeah, it's a bit much.
Yeah. Yeah. Just probably you were gonna publish a book about garden, right? Yeah. Just write 100 pages about trees and
Yeah.
gardens. Yeah. Just
He
really.
loved his Wessex as he called the south of
Yeah.
England. Yeah,
Yeah.
he loved his
Yeah.
Wessex.
Just really labor of love, actually. So yeah, thank you so much again, Shona. We've learned so much from you today. What an honor. So, my lovely viewers, if you enjoyed this conversation, why don't you just drop by Shona's website, Bad in a Day Off? I'm sure you will find her blogs and essays inspiring and informative. Also, don't forget to check out her latest book, How the Victorians Lived. Now, it's time to sip a cup of tea or coffee and have a good read.